All right, everybody, welcome to this webinar. Today, we're going to get kicked off in just a couple minutes. We're going to let some people file in. We know that everybody has to get that last sip of coffee in or tea or whatever your preference is. But I'm really excited. You know, I've been talking about this topic for a while, and I've actually been working with my friends at Aviante about creating this mini workshop series talking about mobile applications. And when we originally approached the idea, we were going to put together a single webinar talking about why companies need a mobile application. And I will tell you, after doing a whole lot of brainstorming, we realized that most people inherently realize that having a mobile application is actually better than not having one, and it's probably needed. What we realized is that most people just didn't really know where to start or really how to even build a plan to launch a mobile application, and then actually use it to make their agency better. So that's where my friends at Aviante and I decided to launch this three-part webinar series where we are going to walk you through the framework of the strategic planning part, which is what we're going to cover today with my friend Parker Saunders, who is the VP of Customer Success over there. And then we're going to move into more of the tactical steps that you need to actually roll it out the right way, and then also build engagement. So you're really creating that positive, frictionless, end-to-end seamless experience for your candidates and for your clients. So just going to wait one more minute before we actually introduce our guest speaker here today. But I want to thank you for being a part of this National Independent Staffing Association workshop series, where we are talking about launching mobile applications for your industry or for your particular agency and why it's important. Again, just to share a couple of my own thoughts before we get kicked off officially here, it's time. We're an industry that tends to lag some of the technology standards of the world. And the mobile application has been completely mainstream for a long enough period of time that we really need to adopt it. But as you know, one of my other main themes this year is improving sales. And if one of the things that we struggle with in this industry is differentiating ourselves. It's hard in a service industry like staffing to fight against commoditization with differentiating ourselves. One of the ways that you can do that is by actually having a mobile application, by actually having the tools and resources necessary to best capture and engage a strong candidate workforce or a strong candidate database is a way that you can actually add value to your potential clients and set yourself apart from your competition. So it is more than just recruiting optimization or even client engagement. There really is a strong sales component and differentiation component to it as well. So we are going to get kicked off. I know there's always going to be people that start a little bit late. We are recording this, so if you need to get access to this later, we can certainly make that available to you. But here we go. We are officially going to kick off the first part of a three-part series in our mobile application best practices. And today we're talking about mobile momentum and how to create winning strategies. How do you actually build that strategy that's going to be successful at deploying a mobile application for your agency? And we are partnered with our good friends Aviante, and they have actually put today a very special guest who is probably the best person possible to explain this to me and to us. And that's actually Parker Saunders. He is the VP of Customer Success at Aviante. But he's actually only been with Aviante for a little over a year and a half since Aviante acquired Workin. And if you're not familiar with Workin, they were the mobile application for the staffing industry that really pioneered the space. And they really brought relevancy, and they brought the gold standard mobile application to our industry. And Parker was one of the first employees, and he's been there being a pioneer on that team, learning everything about the challenges of mobile applications. He's been learning exactly how staffing agencies use them, the do's, the don'ts, the things that you need to be focused on, the things that are just a waste of time. But more importantly, he understands why it adds value to the candidate experience and why it adds value to the client experience. And he's going to start by walking us through the strategic way of rolling that out here today. So Parker, I just want to welcome you to this webinar series and thank you for being here and sharing on this journey with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here with you, Dan, and looking forward to our discussion today as well as our upcoming sessions. Really having a mobile strategy in the way that staffing companies can deploy this mindset around mobile first and talent enablement platforms is something I'm personally passionate about and excited to bring some of my experience to the discussion as we look for ways to really empower other staffing companies to take on that approach as well.
I love that. And before I officially turn things over to you to take us through your material today, just for the audience, for those of you that are here, I just want to do a quick check. Pull your phones out wherever you're at, just pull your smartphone out, unlock the screen, and literally look at your home screen and see all of those little squares that are on there. And I want you just to basically start scrolling from home screen to home screen to home screen to home screen, and just take an inventory mentally about how many mobile applications you actually already have on your device. And if you're anything like me, I actually counted this out the other day. I actually have 12 screens worth of apps, and I don't know exactly how many total applications that is on my phone, but that just tells me that the mobile app is a key part of my life. And I'm actually a regular, like I clean it out. Like if I don't use an app, I remove it from my home screen, right, on a regular basis. So these are literally 12 pages of apps that have made the cut. And I want you to think about that that's something that is on your phone right now that you downloaded for something that was valuable to you. And if you're here with your agency and you didn't see your own mobile app on your digital real estate in your pocket, you're missing the moment. You really are. And I want you to think about all of the people that are in your database as a staffing agency, all of your candidates, all of your workers. They also have mobile apps all over their smartphones, just like you do. And if your app is not on their phone, you're missing a huge opportunity to engage with them. So that's the biggest thing that you just need to look at. Apps are a part of our lives. You need to have yours. There's a right way to go about it, which Parker's going to share with us. But he's also going to get into some of the biggest maybe first questions about why do we need a mobile app. But before I go too far and steal his thunder, Parker, I'm going to give it to you. Take us on this journey, man. I'm excited to learn as you break this down for us.
Yeah, excited to get into it. And as I'm pulling up my slides here, I love the visual that you've created with that exercise there. I think something that example really highlights is not just that, we're all users of smartphones and mobile apps, but it's not enough to just have an app. There's a question around how do you differentiate yourself? How do you create stickiness and add value to whether it's the talent or your clients or your recruiters in a way where they want to keep that app on their phone as well. And that's a big part of what we'll get into, especially in today's discussion as we frame up how to craft a winning mobile strategy. And while this is part one of our three-part series here, we'll really focus on why it is that having a mobile talent platform and a mobile strategy to go with that can be so impactful, and what some of those foundations to success are as we move towards our second session, more focused on the real execution and the complexities that come with that in many cases. So looking forward to our discussion today. And you gave a great introduction to me. Appreciate the kind words there. As you said, my name's Parker Saunders. I'm the VP of Customer Success at Aviante, and I have just over 8 years of experience specifically focused on mobile technology for staffing companies. And in those 8 years, I think we've seen a large evolution of what it is specifically that we're talking about when we're talking about mobile technology for staffing companies. So today, the focus is really on what we call mobile talent platforms. It's not just about, having an app on the phone. It's taking that more holistic approach to thinking about the ways that we can really transform elements of our businesses as staffing companies and turn that into a mobile experience to be able to leverage a lot of the benefits that come with mobile technology today. So I just want to pose a quick question to those of you in the audience. I'd love to get a sense of who we have joining us, what your roles are in your organization, and just kind of a fun question for everyone. What app do you use the most? So I'll give everyone just a little bit to put some responses in the chat. Looking forward to getting to know everyone.
And Parker, and while they're putting that in there, I forgot to mention if you're watching this and you have questions for Parker in real time, feel free to put them in the Q&A. And that way I can take a look at them and make sure Parker sees them here, and we can get them answered for you. And again, just to be interactive, we're all here to learn and work together. Throw something in chat. Who are you? Recruiter, owner, salesperson? Really what role do you serve in the agency, so Parker knows who we're working with. See a question, is the chat disabled? It should not be. Let me. Parker, why don't we go on while I sort this
Sure thing.
This technical difficulty out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining. Looking forward to our discussion today. Really, our topics as we jump into it, we're focused first on really laying that foundation for why mobile. Why is it that we're here talking about mobile in the staffing space? What opportunity is there? What's the impact that this can have to your staffing business? And what looks different about that sort of model using mobile talent platforms to really engage your talent audience, if you will, within the space? And so we'll do that, framing up some of the fundamentals there before jumping into what impact this really has on a day-to-day basis for your talent, what that looks like in terms of a day in the life of a recruiter as well, and ultimately what that influences in terms of overall organizational outcomes within the staffing space. We'll then touch on really some of the change management considerations that come into this, right? So while mobile technology is not something that's new, the really idea of being able to transform a traditional staffing model to take on some of the capabilities that mobile talent platforms enable is something that does require a lot of planning. It requires a lot of strategic considerations around involving the right stakeholders and what strategies you want to use, both to really deploy that type of technology, but also in the process to be able to differentiate yourself, both in the eyes of your talent as well as in the eyes of employers who you're competing for business with as well. And then we'll just touch on briefly some of the content for some of our upcoming sessions as well, where we'll get into more of the details of executing on this type of strategy that we'll establish today. So why mobile? In the context of mobile talent platforms specifically, there's really 4 key tenets of this in terms of outcomes that we can expect when deploying mobile strategies. So the first is about enhancing recruiter efficiency. And this is something that by meeting talent where they are in the form of a mobile app, we're able to automate a lot of tasks that recruiters are working on today. We're able to engage with talent in a one-to-many relationship where we're able to really emphasize the ways in which we can expand the reach of our recruiters, the reach of our organization in engaging with talent. And we're doing so in a way where we're able to target qualified talent specifically. I'll touch on this in just a moment. We're able to meet talent's modern expectations. As Dan suggested, we all have dozens and dozens of apps on our phone. It's the way that we really operate in many aspects of our lives today, and it's the way that your talent are engaging with other companies out in the market. So how is it that staffing companies can really leverage those capabilities to meet talent's modern expectations and improve the overall quality of their interaction with your staffing company? And last, which is one that's actually been somewhat of a surprise to us in the early stages, is the effect that mobile technology has on things like show-up rates for talent. So there's ways that, depending on the different strategies that are deployed to really execute on a mobile strategy, some of the factors that are becoming more and more apparent the more established mobile talent platforms become in the space, where it's able to influence a lot of the results even beyond some of the initial hypotheses of how mobile talent platform strategies can affect the staffing industry as a whole. So I think the best way to really represent the reason behind having a mobile strategy is to talk through the day in the life of our talent, right? The day in the life of really probably any of us on these calls, but especially these users who are really looking for a better way to engage with, and being able to use that level of engagement and the relationship building that comes with that to impact all results across our organization in this type of transformation. So let's take a look at maybe a typical Tuesday for one of our workers here. You wake up, your phone starts ringing, the alarm's going off, and you press snooze maybe, or turn off that alarm on your phone before turning on maybe your favorite news program or podcast, or play some relaxing music as you get started with your day. All of this is happening most likely on your smartphone. As you get wrapped up there, you're checking the weather, getting ready for the day, trying to figure out what the right clothes to wear are before getting ready for work or getting out to run errands. We're doing all of this on apps we have on our phone. Maybe you're pre-ordering your coffee at Starbucks or getting ready to head out for the day before booking a ride on rideshare, using an app to find the transportation schedule for buses in your area, hopping in your own car and pulling up your maps to be able to navigate to work and figure out what the traffic situation is looking like. So the question is, we're using mobile apps in virtually every part of our lives to navigate our own day-to-day, to navigate our own schedules, to get us to the right place on time. So how is it that staffing companies can leverage what we already know about mobile apps, which is that they are a prevalent part of our talent's day-to-day experience? How can we leverage that to be able to grow our businesses, differentiate ourselves from competitors, improve our relationships with talent as a whole? So let's take a look at how prevalent this really is. As you can see, 93% of US adults are regularly using the internet. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone at this point. 85% of US adults own a smartphone. 15% of US adults are smartphone-only internet users. And I think this is especially significant. It's not a surprise to anyone that there is a trend towards higher mobile adoption as a whole, both in the staffing space and in other industries. But that was something that really jumped out to me, that there is a significant percentage of our population, and a growing one at that, who are exclusively using their smartphones to use the internet, engage with companies, things of that sort. And last, of those smartphone-only internet users, 71% are not interested in home internet service, meaning the way of mobile is kind of the way of the world, especially as we're talking about the talent that we're working with on a day-to-day basis. And I think this paints a really important picture about overall demographic changes and the expectations of talent in how they engage with staffing companies, how they engage with companies of all sorts. So before I jump into really how we think about mobile talent platforms and the impact that has on your talent experience and subsequently recruiter experience and client experience, Dan, I had a question for you. I just wanted to pose the question of what's an example maybe of an app that you may use that's improved the quality of your relationship with, maybe a company that you were already a customer of, or a place where you're really looking for information. What's specifically a scenario where an app has improved the quality of that relationship with a company?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny you say that, because as you were giving your example earlier of a typical day, I was actually thinking about all the apps that I actually engage with throughout that morning routine or whatever, and I would have never even counted it that way. But I think the obvious one for me, and I got two that I want to share, but the obvious one is Amazon. If you were to look at my purchase history on Amazon, it's probably 100x since I started really using the mobile app more, which maybe speaks to a bigger problem for myself. But that being said, the reason why is because Amazon figured out that, like, if people can actually order something while they're right in the moment of thinking about it, they're going to do it, right? So they made it easy. So for me, when I think about something, it's like, oh, I need to get this thing, I just pull my phone out, hit the Amazon app, and then I go order it. So I think, and it's not actually improving my relationship with like any person there, but it's definitely improved my relationship. Like, I buy more stuff on Amazon than anywhere else now because of that convenience, because they allow me to interact with them when I'm thinking about it. So that's definitely one. But a big one that's actually improved my relationship with the group is actually my kids' school. So a couple of years ago, they didn't really have a great communication tool. They didn't really have a mobile app. And since they've introduced it, it's allowed us to actually engage with the teachers, the admins in different ways, and actually have another line of communication that's organized and, I guess, protected, or I don't know, secure communication about our kids in a mobile app. So it's not just a text message here, an email there, a phone call there. It's all organized in one spot. And at first I used to think it'd be like, it was just one more thing to be wonky, but it's the go-to hub for everything now. I can actually engage with my kids' teachers. I can coordinate early pickups or late drop-offs, or anything like that. I can learn about assignments, or like you name it. It's really gone a long way to actually enhance the overall relationship and kind of keep parents and teachers aligned on the student development. And it's all organized in one spot, which is nice for me. So those are a couple app examples that I think for me have really added a lot of value to my life, but certainly actually enhanced the relationship at my kids' school.
Yeah, and I love both of those examples because I think they highlight potentially two different value propositions in some ways. If I had to guess, with an example like Amazon, the app has likely replaced, for all intents and purposes, the website in terms of the way that you consume and buy through Amazon. There's companies whose entire approach is that we're presenting a new channel for our consumers like you and myself, who also predominantly use the Amazon app to really interact with Amazon. And all of that's happening in a completely on-demand fashion, right? We've put the power in our fingertips to be able to find what we're looking for and complete the process altogether. But then there's experiences like what you're describing with your school, and my recent experience with buying a home, actually, where parts of the process that already exists today, or the relationships that already exist today, are being augmented and improved using mobile apps, but not necessarily replacing every step of the process. And I think a lot of that's really true of the way that staffing companies are being successful today in really using mobile talent platforms, and the way that maybe companies that haven't started using or deploying a formal mobile strategy are starting to think about the way that they can really change, grow, transform their business using mobile strategies. And so I bring up that real estate example that I had personally as well, just because I think it also paints a really clear picture of, or a good parallel of, how we're thinking about the talent experience with staffing platforms. When I was buying my home, I was set up with an app through our realtor where, very much like Zillow, was able to quickly find homes in my area. I knew what it was that I was looking for and what sort of criteria I had as I was going through that journey. But what the realtor really stepped in to play the role of was to help me navigate that process. So it was my first time buying a home. There's a lot I didn't know about, the ins and outs of really getting to closing. And so the realtor was able to have that more personal relationship with me to help me navigate that process. But a lot of the things that historically would have taken up a lot of the time of those realtors in helping find the homes and better understand my needs in that search process were able to really be improved for my expectations and augment that experience, so that we were able to get to an outcome that I was happy with, and quite frankly, faster than is typically common. So I think a lot of those same principles apply to the way that I think about effective mobile strategies, and the way that staffing companies can look at really adapting their business using these types of platforms. So let's take a look at, now that we kind of have a foundation of understanding of how prevalent mobile apps are. Again, I don't think that's any surprise to anyone, but really getting to better understand the way that mobile talent platforms can influence the experience of the talent themselves. So let's take a look at what a traditional job posting process looks like. And by this, I'm speaking to the experience that, has really been common throughout the industry for quite some time now. The typical process, we have a job requisition that's posted maybe on our website, on Indeed. We get all sorts of applications from candidates who have found that opportunity. So they've submitted their application, maybe their resume. Before a recruiter has the chance to review all of these applicants and ultimately make a hiring decision about who's going to be the best fit for that specific client's needs. So lots of decisions go into that process where the recruiter's involved in, a lot of the administrative steps. They're involved in virtually all of the decision-making steps and making sure that that talent is really having a positive experience before being placed on assignment with the employer. So while a lot of that process at a high level looks the same as you're kind of walking through the steps, match job postings, which is really a capability that's unique to the capabilities of mobile talent platforms, takes a lot of those manual steps and automates them to be able to support more of that one-to-many relationship between the recruiters and the talent. So instead of just a general job posting going out to the entire public audience of anyone who can apply to a job, mobile talent platforms and matched job postings are broadcasting those opportunities specifically out to the workers who meet those criteria for the position. So instead of all sorts of manual searches and really offloading the process of decision making to the very end of the process, where we're working with a very wide net of talent who have applied to a position and working through them until we've narrowed it down to the talent who are the best fit. A lot of those decisions or criteria are things that can be considered up front. So when we have talent on our app, we already know a lot about those workers. We know their skill sets. We know potentially their availability and interests and locations. So we're able to take that information that in many cases is already known early on in the process and use that to inform a decision around who we want to notify. So that at the point that we're starting to get those talent who are interested in positions, we're starting with actually a smaller pool of more qualified talent so that we're able to more efficiently place those workers on assignment. This is something that ultimately, as you can see, going through each of these criteria, we're narrowing down this list further and further before the point that we're asking the recruiter to really take action on these applicants. So there's considerations in really a mobile strategy for what criteria are used to inform the audience that we're broadcasting these opportunities to. And it's things like location, it's things like availability, all of which are, information that can be provided by the talent up front so that we are really presenting to them the most relevant information, the most relevant positions to them, so that we are not bogging them down with, a bunch of time spent in the search process. And subsequently, we're saving the recruiters time in the long run by being able to really front load a lot of those decisions and automate that in the process with mobile technology. So what does this really look like for the recruiter? So we have this understanding that there's an opportunity to meet talent where they are, put a mobile app on their phone where we're able to establish a more direct engagement with them and really enable those talent to make a lot of the decisions themselves, provide that information and use it in a very intelligent way to save the talent time, bring them a more relevant experience, and ultimately change the nature of the role of a recruiter within a staffing company. So in that traditional model, a recruiter's day with traditional staffing tends to look something like this, right? There is an element of workforce planning. There's a large subset of administrative tasks, whether that be in scheduling or reviewing resumes or other applications, in issuing onboarding to talent. There's all sorts of different engagements that fall into that administrative task category. And it leaves very little time in many cases for talent engagement. Whereas in a mobile first model, the recruiter's day tends to look very different. So as a staffing company really matures in their adoption of a mobile strategy where they're able to leverage a lot of that technology to engage with their talent, they're able to automate many of the tasks that happen in the day-to-day of a recruiter to minimize the amount of time spent on those administrative tasks so that the focus of the recruiter can be more strategic and more around building relationships with talent in the form of talent engagement and workforce planning. So I think it's really important to as we think about what a mobile strategy has the capability to do for a staffing company, and think about each of the stakeholders within this process. We have our talent, who we're looking at how ways that we can improve the quality of their experience and really meet them where they are. And in doing so, open up opportunities to realize a lot of those efficiency gains for recruiters, and in many cases improve the quality of the recruiter's day, taking a lot of those administrative tasks off of them so that the focus can be in some of these more meaningful places as well. So as recruiters seek to, focus on building relationships, reduce time spent on those mundane activities, this allows us to make faster, more informed hiring decisions. Again, in many ways, improving the quality of the recruiter's experience themselves and the nature of that work, but also to improve the results that we see on the back end of that. And again, for talent, looking at for mobile first engagement for talent, this puts the job opportunities directly in the hands of talent, provides one easy location to manage work schedules and other preferences, and ultimately increases responsiveness from the talent. So what does this look like at a higher level? What's the overall organizational impact? Really, each of these are building blocks on one another. So as we're able to enable talent by meeting them where they are with a mobile app, we're improving the quality of their experience. We have a more real-time engagement with them, all of which supports improvements in recruiter productivity, both in the sake of efficiency, but also in terms of service quality overall. So Dan, like we were talking with some of the examples of ways we've used other apps in our lives, that there's certain parts of the process, many, in this case of the staffing example, many of the administrative tasks that can be replaced and automated in many cases. But with that, we're able to augment or really make improvements to other elements of the staffing lifecycle that ultimately boost service quality overall. And I think staffing companies today are really looking to find ways to establish a competitive advantage with employers. And when you have each of these foundations really established, and in a way that you're able to do that with deploying a mobile strategy, you're able to differentiate yourself from your competitors. You're able to do that in the form of filling orders faster, improved quality in overall service, and with happier talent. Each of those are going to be elements of your business that you're able to represent to employers that are going to differentiate you from virtually any of your competitors out there. So I want to pause here, and Dan, just kind of direct a question at you as we're talking through really the impact that a mobile staffing platform can have. Before we jump into the journey of how to be successful in executing on a mobile strategy, what jumps out to you in terms of the influence that this can have on, whether it's talent or recruiters, or maybe looking at this at a more holistic organizational level? Is there anything in this that either comes as a surprise to you or that you think is especially important to emphasize?
So I don't think there's anything that comes as a surprise to me, because I've been paying rather close attention to this for a while and wanting to see more mobile app adoption in our space. But I will say the piece that jumps out to me is I feel like right now the recruiters at most staffing agencies they're overburdened. If you think about something that's really amazing, is this entire industry of staffing and recruiting is actually all built around the recruiter. Like, they're the most important person in the entire industry. This entire multi-billion-dollar industry is built around that person. And they have an endless amount of tasks. And as we move through the pandemic with the great technology shift and organizations saying, I've got to do this, I've got to upgrade my ATS, or I've got to add a chat bot, or I've got to do this or that. They've added all of these pieces. Compliance complexities have been layered on. It's been just all dumped down to that recruiter's desk. And I see that graph that you showed where it showed like all of the administrative tasks that they're doing. Like, I feel like if I'm talking to recruiters out there right now, they know what I'm talking about. They know that they have a hard time like getting through all of the mundane necessary tasks that they have to do that are administrative. just to be able to get them to have a little bit of time to actually recruit and engage with talent. So like that's a big one for me, because as leaders, we're always looking for ways to actually increase capacity and do this. And it's not because our recruiters aren't good at what they do. It's just because they have too much administrative overhead. So like that's the really big thing that jumps out to me, is that recruiter productivity and expanding it. The fact that you mentioned the candidate engagement and reducing no-shows, that's actually was a little bit of a shock, I guess, to me, because I didn't know how this would have that impact. But Parker, I almost tie it back to my Amazon example. Like I use the app when I want to engage with Amazon, and I know there's probably some recruiters that are reluctant, that they might say, well, we don't want an app because we don't want to circumvent ourselves, or we don't want to put a piece of technology in between us and the candidate relationship. But I realized that I actually leaned in more to my relationship with Amazon when I had the ability to engage with them on my time. So if I'm a job seeker and it strikes me, like if I'm working a job that I hate and I'm like, oh, I need to find a better job, like, and I can just go hit a mobile app and go find one quickly, like, I think I would lean into that more. And I think that like you would actually, the recruiter would actually get more candidates that are more invested in a job search and ready to take action. They would actually be dealing with more serious candidates coming to them if they had this outlet, which actually would increase their productivity as well. So I think those are my big takeaways so far that I'm seeing from this.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I think it's consistent with a lot of the feedback I hear from staffing companies is that you're right. If you're to ask recruiters if there were elements of their job that, they think would be better spent elsewhere, you'd come to those sort of conclusions. So there's a lot, I think, in terms of when staffing companies really on that journey or just starting that journey to consider deploying a mobile strategy, one of the common objections really is a fear of the impact to recruiters, when the reality of what we see out in the market with mobile technology today is that really the nature of their role or the responsibilities of the recruiter that are most impacted here are those that they probably have a preference to spend less time doing. And by enabling talent and empowering them much in the way that you describe with that autonomy you have in the decision-making process with something like an Amazon, on the receiving end of those applicants, the recruiter is really having more quality interactions with a more targeted audience of people who really are needing that human element and needing that support in ultimately getting them on assignment at the end of the day. By building on the quality of experience for both parties there, and that's really where the most meaningful results come out of this. So I think your example continues to hold true there and is something that I think really resonates with me as well.
And you probably just to add that too, as I'm thinking about what you were sharing, especially with the targeted job notifications and whatnot, you probably increase redeployment. I know agencies spend a lot of money on job boards to fill up their ATSs and their databases with talent, and then we'll place it. And it seems like the first priority or step when we get a new job order from a client is just to post back on the job boards and get more talent into the database, because we know that that's the easy filter for active job seekers. Because if they're on a job board and they're applying to a job, then they're active and maybe ready to be deployed. But I feel like if you had a mobile app, you might actually have a better chance of actually redeploying the talent that's already vetted in your database. So you don't have to pay for new candidates because you've already paid to get them in there. And two, you're also furthering the relationship with that candidate because you might be able to send them on a second or third or fourth assignment. So I got to believe that having like this mobile app technology probably also helps with like redeployment rates.
You're right. And I think there's a couple of reasons that that's the case that jump out at me. One, as we talked about in the very beginning of our discussion here, was simply the screen real estate of a mobile app truly does play a role, right? If you've given talent a reason to keep your app on their device, then there's that visual reminder. There's an easy way for them to re-engage with you. So that's definitely one element of it. The other, when we think about automation with this type of technology, is the longer that you have a history built up with that talent, the better the data on that talent is likely to get. You're able to build on the information that you have with them over time, and that allows you to get even more targeted in the way that you're engaging with them. So when considering any form of automation, I always say that, the quality of your automation or the results you can expect from automation are only as good as the data that you have to back that. Any form of automation is depending on data points to be able to take some of those tasks out of the human equation and into system automations. And so when we think about having that direct link to talent on their phone, we're not only giving them empowering them to make a lot of these decisions. We're also empowering them to provide information more easily in many cases, which does help the case for redeployment as well. So I think that there's a lot of reasons that's the case, but I think that's a great observation and a great point.
Awesome.
All right, so let's get into our journey with change. And what I'm speaking to in terms of change here is what are really the foundations? What needs to be true for if I'm a leader in the staffing space? What do I need to be considering before really going out on this journey to deploy a mobile strategy? And it starts with including the right people. So while oftentimes I think the idea of having, releasing an app can be oversimplified, there's really the staffing companies that are the most successful in deploying a mobile strategy are those who take a holistic approach to incorporating mobile into their overall strategy, not just having a separate dedicated mobile strategy, but assessing how it fits into their overall business objectives and using mobile as a tool to execute and achieve those outcomes versus one that solves for its own outcomes in isolation. So a big way we need to think about that is involving the right people. And it's not just having the IT leadership or a small project team there. It's about considering the different roles that we need to have represented to ensure we're most successful in deploying this type of strategy to really transform our business as a whole. So what we see being the case for staffing companies that are most successful out the gate are those who include representation from operations, representation from marketing, as we're thinking about ways that we want to communicate to both our clients and really the nature of, deploying a mobile app involves marketing to talent as well. We want recruiters who are going to be easily the most influential in the overall process. If we're not seeing adoption from recruiters and we're not getting their input even in the planning process, then we're likely going to be missing some of the fundamentals of what makes our organization successful, what they are looking for and ways to improve their overall experience, because ultimately they are the drivers of this change as we're looking to change the way we engage with talent and what sort of information we're putting in front of them. We, of course, need trainers involved as we start to think about how we're going to inform our recruiters, what sort of content may need to be created in terms of FAQs or other information to make readily available to our talent. We need to be thinking ahead of time about what possible objections are, what some of the challenges we can expect to encounter that may be new to this sort of mobile approach to engaging with all stakeholders. And ultimately need to have, of course, decision makers involved in the process who are really dedicated to have a comprehensive understanding of our strategy as a whole, what our vision is for deploying a mobile strategy, and making sure that we have people who are really dedicated to making that all possible. So I realize that while each of these functions are represented, we have 5 different functions represented in the specific visual. The intent of this isn't to say that you need to have a person from each of these teams or many people from each of these teams to be successful. It's more the nature of the responsibilities and the perspective that comes with each of these. And I say that because I've worked with everything from startups to multi-billion-dollar staffing companies. So I realize that, resources look very different for different types of staffing staffing companies. And it's not about how many people you have that's a prerequisite to success. It's just representation of each of those different perspectives so that we make sure that we're making the right considerations when building a strategy for mobile. So now that we have the right people in place, what really does having an effective change management strategy look like when considering successful mobile adoption? First is quite simple, and much of this really isn't unique to mobile strategy, I should say. I think a lot of this is fundamentals of change management as a whole, but they are especially important to put emphasis on when preparing to be successful with deploying a mobile strategy and really a mobile platform as a whole. First is establishing the why, clearly communicating the reasons and benefits that we as a staffing company are, excited about deploying our mobile app and having a mobile strategy as a whole. And this doesn't need to be something that, perfectly mirrors exactly the value proposition that I've painted on some of the earlier slides. I think a lot of this comes for consideration of your unique organizational vision, what outcomes you're trying to influence for your recruiters, for your talent, and where you expect to see yourself in 5 or 10 years. So while a lot of the why may be consistent from staffing company to staffing company, consideration for your own unique business objectives is equally important in this sort of consideration to make sure, as I said previously, that your mobile strategy is not completely separate category than your overall business strategy. The two should really come hand in hand. So once you've established why and what your vision is for your organization as a whole and how mobile fits into that, engaging those stakeholders at the right points in time throughout the process to make sure that we're getting that level of participation, that we're getting all sorts of eyes on the product and the changes to our process that we're proposing as a result of this. All of this is incredibly important at every stage of implementation, launch, and even as you mature in a mobile strategy, engaging those stakeholders as we reassess and look for ways to continue to improve on the processes as a whole. And then last is the role of change champions. So this is all about identifying individuals who share enthusiasm for progress. And I really, really want to emphasize this because while each of these other components are really prerequisites to successful change management with any type of technology, change champions is, or the lack thereof, has probably been the thing I've seen have the biggest impact on the success of staffing companies in deploying mobile platforms. And I think the reason for that is, as established as mobile is in the space of consumers, there are still people out there, especially in staffing companies, who really don't see what this is going to do to improve their business or help them achieve their objectives within that. And quite frankly, some people are a lot more excited and maybe more regular users of the apps on their phone than others in the organization. So while we need to make sure that experts in each of those functions are represented in the project, really understanding who within your organization is most excited about the change that comes with this is an important population to ensure is included in these sort of implementation projects and throughout the adoption journey, because they're going to be the cheerleaders on the sidelines, making sure that, that enthusiasm is shared throughout the organization. Because while there's a lot to be excited about in terms of what's possible with having a mobile strategy, there are going to be challenges along the way. So making sure that someone has really been designated as those team members in whatever their role may be to play that role of change champions is incredibly influential throughout the process. That could be branch leaders, that could be senior leadership, that could be recruiters. At all levels of the organization, there's an opportunity to identify change champions because their influence is instrumental in the success of deploying a mobile strategy. And so last here, just really as a review of kind of what we've touched on the previous couple of slides, having involvement from training teams, equipping employees with the skills to thrive. And this ties together with having the right messaging for the right audiences at the right time. When we think about the role of training and deploying a mobile strategy, there's a lot about the talent experience itself that tends to be quite intuitive for the reasons we've discussed throughout today's session, that we're all familiar with using mobile apps. We likely use them all throughout our day. But considerations for the processes that are going to change as a result of a mobile strategy and the way that you're going to use this technology to influence change in your organization does require taking into account what sort of training materials maybe that you already have need to be adjusted, what new content needs to be created to support successful adoption of these changing processes. Second is anticipating resistance to change and proactively addressing it. So all of this is in the spirit of having quality communication for your stakeholders here. There's a lot that can be, that is known going into a mobile implementation project. But being able to have an understanding of what those objections likely are and using people like your change champions to be able to get ahead of those sort of objections that we can anticipate and to really be able to reframe that and refocus on the outcomes that we're solving for and what's possible. Third is monitoring progress. This cannot be understated here, or cannot be overstated rather. When we're talking about monitoring progress, at the beginning of the adoption journey, once you have your mobile app and you are live in the stores, there is so much importance on measuring adoption in those early stages. A lot of staffing companies, when they've gone through this journey of building out their mobile talent platform and releasing this out to the stores and all the excitement that comes with getting this in front of talent, there tends to be an immediate focus on those lagging indicators and downstream ROI, like, recruiter efficiency and gross profit, all of which are incredibly important, and they are the destination that we want to be focused on. In the early stages, a focus on adoption and making sure that our recruiters are using the tools that we've built out and they understand how this ultimately can improve their day-to-day, as we talked about earlier. And the same applies to talent. The same applies to really all levels of the organization, staying close to each of those users throughout the process, monitoring their progress and building on these first two elements of training and kind of FAQs, I guess I could categorize that as, building on that over time so that you're continuing to improve the process overall and build on that foundation that you've set out the gate. And last is celebrating successes, again, at all stages of the journey. That means celebrating simply that we have, offices who are using mobile to engage with more talent than they ever had before, or some of those small wins that happen along the way. There's all different flavors of success that can be expected throughout this journey as you're making that effort to adopt a mobile strategy and really put this in front of your talent, clients, your recruiters. Celebrating those successes at all stages goes so far in really continuing to build on the confidence of maybe those users who aren't quite ready for it yet or aren't getting it right out the gate. Being able to demonstrate what is possible within your organization and uniquely suited to help you achieve your outcomes is something that is so influential in the overall process of coaching through change with mobile. So what we're looking at here, I think this is some overarching theme as we think about the ways that we approach managing change throughout the organization. I wanted to highlight that with each of these stakeholders, there's, today's session is really focused on the foundations for success before getting into the real details of executing on a mobile strategy. And what is worth re-emphasis here is talking about planning communications for all stakeholders here. So what do internal communications look like to recruiters, branch managers, and other team leads? What considerations need to be made on that front to ensure that the vision that you've established at the start of this project and the outcomes that you're expecting to influence with a mobile strategy are understood throughout the organization? It's a common challenge I see with staffing companies as they first really get started with this, that there's so much enthusiasm and so much clarity on the vision for how mobile as a whole is going to transform the way that they do business. But oftentimes that enthusiasm and that clarity isn't something that makes its way down to the recruiters and the real users of the platform as a whole. So it's incredibly important that that vision is shared with all stakeholders throughout the process. Client communications. This is often not something that needs to be considered to be able to launch a mobile platform, but it's certainly a major influence for why, reevaluating your process through the lens of mobile often takes place from the get-go. So as you may focus more on the talent and recruiter side at the beginning of your adoption journey, thinking about the way that you're going to share, your successes, share the innovative approach that you're taking to really revising the way that you do business today in a way that will resonate with clients and allows you to differentiate yourself above and beyond, ways you may differentiate yourself today is incredibly important. Last, we've got talent communications. Talent communications, as you can see with some examples on the left-hand side, is where are you already presenting content and information to your talent today? So a big part, maybe the biggest part of deploying a mobile strategy is how do you make sure that you get the app in the hands of your talent? And that means both your existing population of workers who you have a prior relationship with, and there's an opportunity for that redeployment use case as you speak to. What is our messaging and how are we going to communicate with that known worker population? But also, how are we going to broadcast and really market our app to net new talent to address the top of funnel side of the equation as well? So there's really two sides to that are both equally important. But the key point here is that planning this early on in your project and in your assessment of mobile talent platforms is critical, is probably one of the most influential things or the biggest ways to get a head start on these sort of projects, since oftentimes I see that these are the last things to be considered. There's so much focus on the product because we know that's what's going to, change the way that we interact with talent, but without really preparing for communicating that value proposition and potentially changes in process to each of these stakeholders, planning that as early as humanly possible is one of the biggest ways that you can jumpstart your growth. So to review, what will mobile do for you? How will you communicate that to your team? And at the heart of both of those questions and both of those answers ultimately is, why do you do what you do? This means, as an organization, what is it that your organization values? What outcomes are you trying to solve for? And by establishing that at the heart of each of these questions, you're best able to inform how you're going to communicate that to your team and ultimately what mobile will do for you at the end of the day. So I will pause there. I know a lot of this today is focused very high level on why having a mobile strategy is important and some of these things that we can consider before getting deep into, some of the successes that I've seen, some of the ways that you can influence the greatest results, and some of the biggest challenges that staffing companies in the space have seen in deploying a mobile talent strategy. Are there any questions that, with our remaining time here today, that I can help answer? I'm really excited to get deeper into the strategies that we've seen be really effective in adopting mobile, but want to make sure that I'll leave a couple minutes here for any questions from the audience or from yourself, Dan.
So I don't have any open questions right now from the audience, and I know we're right up against time. So the one question that I would ask, I think is probably on everybody's mind, is what's a realistic time frame? Let's say somebody made the decision today to say, hey, we want to add mobile. We think it's the right move. And they made that decision today and they followed this framework that you shared for strategic planning. Like, what's a realistic timeline to expect before you're actually launching your mobile application into the marketplace and then getting it into the hands of your candidates and clients?
That's a great question. I would say, so best practice as I see it is often starting with a proof of concept or identifying an initial phase or initial market to deploy this mobile strategy with, to be able to develop some best practices unique to your organization. I think getting to that initial launch phase is realistic for most staffing companies within a 3 to 6 month time frame. So that's covering full implementation, that's covering any sort of questions that come along the way, preparing communication plans. That tends to be realistic for staffing companies to get to that day one launch. And I know for some, that sounds like a very long period of time, but of course, it involves a lot of these strategic considerations. For others, that may seem very fast, depending on what your implementation experience has been historically. So I look at that as day one, but for a lot of staffing companies, from that day one launch to the point where they really see maturity in this sort of transformation is often another 6 months, year, some cases even 2 years, depending on what all elements of your business process you're hoping to adapt with your mobile strategy.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. I know we're right at time. We'll probably get other questions that pop up. So if people want to email you, Parker, what is the best way for them to send a question to you on this? And then again, we'll be back at this in 2 weeks. Parker and I will be right back talking about kind of the next step of mobile strategy execution here.
Absolutely. Yep. You can contact me at parker.saunders@aviante.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions that come out of today's sessions, or if there's any information that we want to make sure to learn more about as we get into our upcoming sessions in the series. Would love any sort of feedback there as well.
Awesome. Parker, thank you so much for being here today, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you all.